Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories today. I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story asterisk. The crystal chandeliers of the Grandview Hotel cast dancing shadows across the marble floor, and Alina Winters stood near the edge of the ballroom, feeling completely out of place. She adjusted the emerald dress her best friend Olivia had insisted she wear, running her fingers nervously through her auburn hair. As an architect, she was more comfortable with blueprints and construction sites than fancy charity events. But Olivia had practically dragged her here tonight. The annual Justice Foundation Gala attracted the city's elite. Lawyers, judges, politicians, and philanthropists. All gathered under the pretense of supporting legal aid for the underprivileged. Alina had agreed to come only because her firm had donated a significant portion of the building's renovation designs. She never expected her entire world to shift the moment she locked eyes with him across the crowded room. Judge Nathaniel Cross stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. At 42, he carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside when he walked past. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. The Iron Judge, they called him in the legal circles. A man who showed no mercy to criminals, no sympathy to weak arguments, and no interest in the social games that consumed most of his colleagues. His dark hair was beginning to show hints of silver at the temples, and his gray eyes held the weight of 1,000 difficult decisions. But in that moment, when those gray eyes found Alina's hazel ones, something cracked in the armor he had spent decades building. She was not looking at him with the usual mixture of fear and respect he received from strangers. Instead, there was curiosity in her gaze, and something else he could not quite name. It was as if she could see past the judge, past the reputation. Straight to the man beneath, Alina felt her breath catch in her throat. She had seen photographs of Judge Cross in newspapers, had heard stories about his legendary courtroom presence, but nothing prepared her for the intensity of his actual gaze. It felt like he was studying her, reading her the way he must read witnesses and lawyers, searching for truth beneath surface appearances. She should have looked away, should have turned back to the conversation Olivia was having with some corporate lawyer. But she found herself unable to break the connection. Nathaniel made a decision in that instant, one that went against every careful instinct he had cultivated over the years. He set down his glass and began walking toward her, his stride purposeful and unhurried. The crowd seemed to part naturally before him, conversations pausing as people recognized who was moving through the room. Alina watched him approach, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, when he finally stood before her. The noise of the gala faded into background whispers. Up close, Alina could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tensed as if he was fighting some internal battle. He was even more striking in person, radiating a kind of controlled power that both intimidated and fascinated her. "Nathaniel Cross," he said, his voice deeper than she expected. "Smooth like aged wine, though I suspect you already know that." "Alina Winters," she replied, finding her voice steadier than she felt. "And yes, your reputation does precede you, Your Honor." He smiled at that, a rare expression that transformed his entire face. "Please, tonight I am just Nathaniel. No titles, no courtrooms. Just a man who saw someone interesting across a very boring room." Alina felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had expected formality, perhaps polite small talk about the charity or the weather. She had not expected this direct honesty that felt both refreshing and dangerous. "The boring room that raised $2 million for legal aid," she teased gently. "That must be terribly disappointing for you." "On the contrary," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. The evening just became infinitely more interesting. They talked for hours that night, oblivious to the curious stares and whispered speculation around them. Alina told him about her work as an architect, her passion for designing spaces that brought beauty and function together, her frustration with clients who only cared about cutting costs. Nathaniel listened with an intensity that made her feel like every word mattered, like she was the only person in the entire ballroom. In turn, he shared more than he intended. He spoke of the weight of his position, the loneliness of making decisions that affected people's lives. the constant pressure to be perfect and impartial. He admitted that he could not remember the last time he had a conversation that was not about work. The last time someone looked at him and saw a person rather than a position. As the night wore on, they moved from the crowded ballroom to a quieter terrace overlooking the city lights. The spring air was cool against Elena's bare shoulders, and without a word, Nathaniel removed his jacket and draped it over her. The gesture was simple, but felt profoundly intimate. His jacket carried his scent, something clean and masculine with hints of cedar and old books. Elena pulled it closer, feeling protected in a way she had not experienced in years. They stood at the railing, looking out at the glittering skyline. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. Elena broke the silence first. "This is unexpected," she said softly. "I did not come here tonight expecting to meet anyone. Certainly not someone like you." "Someone like me," Nathaniel repeated, turning to face her. "Cold, intimidating, completely unsuitable for someone with your warmth and passion." She looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "That is not what I meant at all. I meant someone who makes me feel like the ground is shifting beneath my feet, someone who looks at me like I matter." Nathaniel reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted. When she did not move, his hand cupped her cheek with surprising gentleness. "You do matter, Elena. I have spent 2 hours with you, and I feel more alive than I have in the last 2 years." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Elena closed her eyes at the sensation. "This is crazy," she whispered. "We just met." "I know," he agreed, but his hand did not move away. "I have built my entire career on logic and evidence, on careful consideration of facts. But right now, the only fact that matters is that I do not want this night to end." Elena opened her eyes and found herself drowning in his gaze. Every rational part of her brain was screaming warnings. He was a judge, one of the most powerful men in the legal system. She was just an architect trying to build her career. They came from different worlds, moved in different circles. Getting involved with someone like him was asking for complications she did not need. But when he leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, rational thought abandoned her completely. Their first kiss was soft and questioning, a gentle exploration that sent shivers down Elena's spine. Nathaniel kissed her like she was precious, like he was afraid she might disappear if he held too tight. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing harder, and the world seemed to have tilted on its axis. That was, Elena started, then found she had no words to describe what she was feeling. The beginning, Nathaniel finished for her, his forehead resting against hers. "If you will let it be." Over the following weeks, they saw each other whenever Nathaniel's demanding schedule allowed. He would text her between court sessions, brief messages that made her smile during stressful client meetings. They met for coffee in small cafes far from downtown, where nobody would recognize the distinguished judge sitting across from a woman who was not from his usual social circles. They walked through parks after dark, talking about everything and nothing. Learning each other's histories and dreams, Elena discovered that beneath his stern courtroom demeanor, Nathaniel had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He made her laugh with observations about the absurdities of legal proceedings, about lawyers who thought dramatic gestures would sway his decisions, about the strange psychology of people who thought they could lie to a judge who had spent 20 years reading body language. She found herself falling for the man behind the reputation, the one who admitted he was tired of being alone, who confessed that success and respect were poor substitutes for genuine connection. Nathaniel, in turn, was captivated by Elena's passion for life. She approached everything with enthusiasm that had long ago died in him. When she talked about a building project, her whole face lit up. She gestured wildly with her hands, describing arches and foundations, and the way natural light could transform a space. She made him remember what it felt like to love your work, to believe that what you did mattered beyond just going through the motions. She made him want to be better, not as a judge, but as a man. Their relationship remained a secret by unspoken agreement. Nathaniel's position made any romantic involvement subject to scrutiny. Elena valued her independence too much to become known as the judge's girlfriend. They were happy in their bubble, stealing moments between their busy lives, building something real, away from public eyes. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and neither of them realized that their happiness was being watched by eyes that saw opportunity in their connection. 3 months into their relationship, Alina noticed small things that did not quite add up. Strange cars parked outside her apartment building. A feeling of being followed when she left work late. Messages from unknown numbers that disconnected when she answered. She told herself she was being paranoid, that success as a woman architect naturally attracted unwanted attention. She did not want to burden Nathaniel with her anxieties when he already carried so much weight. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and with it came a sense of dread she could not explain. A premonition that the happiness she had found was too good to last. That something was waiting in the shadows to tear it all apart. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who insisted Alina sign for it personally. She stood in her apartment doorway, still in her pajamas, with coffee cooling on the counter, staring at the official seal on the envelope. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, and her world collapsed with every word she read. Alina Winters was required to appear before a grand jury investigation regarding financial irregularities at Pinnacle Design Group, the architecture firm where she had worked for 5 years before starting her own small practice. The letter stated that her testimony was crucial to understanding a pattern of fraud, bribery, and illegal bidding practices that had allegedly taken place during her tenure. She was not being charged with any crime, the letter assured her, but her cooperation was mandatory. Alina sank onto her couch, her mind racing through memories of her time at Pinnacle. She had left the firm 18 months ago precisely because she suspected something unethical was happening. Projects were being awarded based on relationships rather than merit, and there were whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered rooms. She had raised concerns with her supervisor once and been told to focus on her designs and stop asking questions. A month later, she resigned and started her own practice with 2 other idealistic architects. Now those suspicions were apparently confirmed, and somehow she was caught in the middle of it. Alina read through the attached documents listing projects she had worked on, bids that had been submitted, meetings she had attended. Everything looked routine on the surface, but she knew investigations like this did not happen unless prosecutors believed they had evidence of serious crimes. Her phone buzzed with a message from Nathaniel. "Good morning, beautiful. Difficult sentencing hearing today, but thinking of you makes it bearable. Dinner tonight?" Alina stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Should she tell him about the summons? They had been so careful to keep their relationship separate from his work, never discussing his cases, never putting him in any position that could compromise his integrity. This felt different somehow, more dangerous. She texted back a brief response saying she was not feeling well and needed to postpone dinner. It was not exactly a lie. She felt sick to her stomach, terrified of what this investigation might uncover and where it might lead. She spent the rest of the day researching the case online, discovering that federal prosecutors had been building it for over a year. Multiple architecture firms were under investigation, along with several city planning officials and construction companies. It was a massive corruption probe that was making headlines. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks away, and Alina hired a lawyer named Robert Davidson, a sharp criminal defense attorney who came highly recommended. During their first meeting, Robert reviewed all the documents and gave her a grim assessment. The prosecutors were looking for witnesses who could testify about the internal workings of Pinnacle Design Group, about who knew what and when. Alina's position as a senior architect who had left the company made her valuable to their case. But there was something else, Robert said, leaning forward across his desk. Something that made this situation much more complicated. He pulled out a document that showed the judge assigned to the case. Alina felt her blood turn to ice when she saw the name printed in bold letters at the top. Judge Nathaniel Cross thought the room spun around her. Of all the judges in the district, of all the possible assignments, this case had landed on Nathaniel's docket. The universe seemed to be conspiring against their happiness with cruel precision. Robert was talking, explaining conflict of interest procedures, discussing whether the judge would need to recuse himself if their relationship became known. But Alina barely heard him through the roaring in her ears. That evening, Alina sat in her apartment staring at her phone. She had 17 missed calls from Nathaniel and a dozen text messages, growing increasingly worried. The last one simply said, "Alina, please talk to me. Whatever is wrong, we can face it together." But that was exactly what terrified her. Facing it together meant exposing their relationship, which meant potentially destroying his reputation and career. Nathaniel had worked for 20 years to build his position as one of the most respected judges in the state. How could she be the reason all of that came crashing down? She thought about the way people would talk. They would say he gave her preferential treatment, that he compromised the integrity of the court for a woman he was sleeping with. It did not matter that their relationship had started months before the investigation, that neither of them had any knowledge of what was coming. The appearance of impropriety was often as damaging as actual misconduct in the legal world. Alina could not do that to him, could not be the weakness that his enemies would use to tear him down. There was only one solution she could see. She had to disappear from his life before the hearing, before anyone connected them publicly, before she became the scandal that destroyed everything he had built. Alina spent that night crying into her pillow, mourning a relationship that had been the happiest thing in her adult life. By morning, her decision was made. She sent Nathaniel a single text message. "I am sorry. I cannot do this anymore. Please do not try to find me." Then she blocked his number, deleted their messages, and removed every trace of their connection from her phone and social media. She took a leave of absence from her architecture practice, telling her partner she needed to deal with a family emergency. She moved temporarily to a small rental across town, somewhere Nathaniel would never think to look for her. The next 2 weeks were torture for both of them, though neither knew the other's pain. Nathaniel was devastated by Elena's sudden departure. He had replayed their last few conversations 1,000 times, searching for clues about what had gone wrong. One day they were planning a weekend trip together, talking about introducing each other to their families, building a future. The next day, she was gone without explanation. Cutting off all contact like he meant nothing, he tried to find her, of course. He drove past her apartment repeatedly, finding it dark and empty. He called her architecture office only to be told she was unavailable. He even considered using his connections to track her down, but stopped himself. Recognizing that such behavior crossed lines he had sworn never to cross. If Alina wanted to leave, he had no right to force her to explain why. No matter how much it destroyed him, Nathaniel threw himself into work with renewed intensity. Using cases as a distraction from the ache in his chest, his colleagues noticed the change. The way his already stern demeanor became even more rigid and cold. He granted no leniency in sentencing, showed no patience for delays or excuses. The Iron Judge became even more iron, his reputation for harshness growing with each ruling, when he reviewed the docket for the upcoming Pinnacle Design Group case. Nathaniel did not immediately recognize Elena's name among the witness list. There were dozens of names, hundreds of pages of evidence and testimony summaries. It was not until the preliminary hearing day arrived that he saw her walk into his courtroom, and the shock of it nearly knocked him off the bench. Alina kept her eyes down as she entered. Following her lawyer through the gallery toward the witness section, she wore a conservative navy suit, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she looked thinner than he remembered, with dark circles under her eyes. Nathaniel gripped his gavel so hard his knuckles turned white, struggling to maintain the neutral expression required of his position. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in his mind. This was why she had left. She had known about the investigation and known he would be the judge. And rather than compromise him, she had disappeared from his life. Anger and admiration warred in his chest. Anger that she had not trusted him enough to discuss it, that she had made the decision unilaterally to end their relationship. Admiration that she had been willing to sacrifice her own happiness to protect his reputation. The preliminary hearing proceeded with Nathaniel operating on autopilot, his legal training allowing him to function even while his mind was in chaos. He ruled on motions, heard arguments, set schedules, all while hyper-aware of Alina sitting 30 feet away, never once looking in his direction. When the session ended and court was adjourned, he watched her hurry out with her lawyer, and every instinct screamed at him to follow, to demand answers, to fix whatever was broken between them. But he could not. Not here, not now, not while this case hung over both of them like a sword. Nathaniel returned to his chambers and sat heavily in his leather chair, staring at the file in front of him. He should recuse himself immediately. The ethical thing to do was to disclose his relationship with a witness and step away from the case. But something held him back, some instinct that there was more happening here than a simple corruption investigation. That night, Nathaniel did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He dug deeper into the case files, reading through testimony transcripts and evidence lists with a focus that went beyond normal judicial review. What he found troubled him deeply. The investigation seemed almost too perfect, too neatly packaged. Witnesses had come forward at convenient times. Evidence had been discovered in suspiciously accessible locations, and most concerning, Elena's name appeared in several documents that he could not verify as authentic. Someone was manipulating this case, and Nathaniel had a growing suspicion about who and why. There were people in positions of power who had always resented his reputation for incorruptibility, who saw him as an obstacle to their own ambitions. What better way to compromise him than to force him off a high-profile case by exposing a relationship with a key witness? Or worse, to use that relationship to question every ruling he made if he stayed on the case. Nathaniel made a decision that went against his usual cautious nature. He would not recuse himself. Not yet. Instead, he would investigate quietly, carefully, using resources outside normal channels. If someone was setting up Elena as part of a larger scheme to damage him, he would expose them before they could do more harm. It was risky, and probably foolish. But for the first time in his careful, controlled life, Nathaniel Cross was willing to break his own rules for someone he loved. Elena, alone in her temporary apartment, stared at the ceiling and wondered how long she could keep running. The investigation was expanding, and her lawyer had warned her that she might be called to testify multiple times. Every appearance meant facing Nathaniel across the courtroom, meant maintaining the pretense that they were strangers when her heart broke a little more each time she saw him. She did not know how much longer she could be strong, how much longer she could protect him by staying away. Neither of them realized that their separate struggles were about to collide in ways that would force everything into the open. The conspiracy that had targeted them was far from finished, and the real battle was only beginning. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Nathaniel had hired a private investigator named Thomas Reed, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud cases. Thomas had been digging through financial records for 3 weeks when he discovered something that made the entire conspiracy unravel like a poorly sewn thread. The evidence against Pinnacle Design Group was real, but Elena's involvement had been fabricated. Someone with access to internal company systems had backdated documents, inserted her name into email chains she had never been part of, and created a paper trail that placed her at meetings she had never attended. The forgeries were good but not perfect. Thomas found the digital fingerprints that proved the manipulation. More importantly, Thomas traced the manipulation back to its source. The person orchestrating the frame was someone Nathaniel knew all too well. Victoria Brennan, the ambitious district attorney who had been campaigning for a federal judgeship. Victoria had been building high-profile corruption cases to boost her reputation, and she needed convictions to prove she was tough on white-collar crime. When legitimate evidence proved insufficient, she had begun manufacturing it. But why target Elena specifically? The answer was as simple as it was infuriating. Victoria had been at the charity gala where Nathaniel and Elena first met. She had seen them together on the terrace, witnessed their kiss, and immediately recognized an opportunity. If she could force Nathaniel off a major case by exposing his relationship with a witness, she would eliminate her biggest obstacle to the federal judgeship. Nathaniel was also being considered for the position, and his impeccable reputation made him the favored candidate. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. Frame Elena in a corruption case, assign it to Nathaniel, and then leak their relationship to the media at the most damaging moment. Either Nathaniel would recuse himself and appear weak, or he would stay on the case and face accusations of bias. Either way, his reputation would be damaged enough to remove him from consideration for the judgeship. Nathaniel sat in his home office at midnight, reading through Thomas's report with growing fury. They had not just been unlucky victims of circumstance. They had been deliberately targeted, their happiness weaponized as part of a political power play. Elena had sacrificed their relationship to protect him, never knowing that the threat was manufactured specifically to force that sacrifice. He picked up his phone and stared at her blocked number, wishing he could call her right now and explain everything. But it was not enough to know the truth privately. He needed to expose Victoria's scheme publicly, to clear Elena's name completely. And to do that, he needed to be strategic. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. and Nathaniel began preparing for what would be the most important session of his career. Alina barely slept that night. She knew tomorrow would be difficult. Having to sit in Nathaniel's courtroom while prosecutors questioned her about projects she barely remembered, Robert had prepared her thoroughly. But no amount of preparation could ready her for the pain of being so close to Nathaniel, while pretending he meant nothing. She dressed carefully in a gray suit, pulling her hair back and applying minimal makeup, trying to look professional and unmemorable. The courtroom was packed when she arrived. The Pinnacle case had attracted significant media attention, and reporters filled the gallery alongside curious lawyers and law students. Alina took her seat in the witness section, keeping her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. When the bailiff called for everyone to rise, she stood mechanically. Still not looking up, Nathaniel entered from his chambers, his black robes flowing behind him. His expression, the stern mask everyone expected from the Iron Judge. He took his seat behind the bench, and his gray eyes swept the courtroom with practiced authority. When his gaze passed over Alina, she felt it like a physical touch. But his face revealed nothing. The prosecution called their first witnesses, building their case methodically. They presented documents and emails, financial records, and testimony from former Pinnacle employees. Everything pointed toward a systematic pattern of corruption, and Alina's name appeared repeatedly in the evidence. Robert objected skillfully to several pieces of testimony, noting inconsistencies and questioning authenticity, but the overall picture being painted looked damning. Then it was Alina's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand on trembling legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. For the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked directly at Nathaniel. His face was impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a message she could not quite read. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Mills, who worked directly under Victoria Brennan, began her questioning. Jennifer was aggressive from the start, trying to establish that Alina had been aware of illegal activities and had participated in them willingly. Alina answered carefully, honestly, explaining that she had suspected problems, but had never seen direct evidence until she left the company. She described raising concerns with supervisors and being told to focus on her design work. The testimony was going as well as could be expected until Jennifer produced a document that made Alina's blood run cold. It was an email chain, allegedly, showing Alina coordinating with city officials to rig a bidding process. The emails were detailed and damning, containing language that clearly indicated knowledge of illegal activity. Alina stared at the printed pages in disbelief. She had never written those emails, never sent those messages. But there was her name and email address at the top of each one. "I did not write these," Alina said firmly, her voice cutting through the courtroom. "This is not real. Someone has fabricated this evidence." Jennifer smiled coldly. "That is a serious accusation, Miss Winters. Are you suggesting that federal prosecutors have manufactured evidence?" Before Alina could respond, Nathaniel's voice rang out from the bench. "I am suggesting exactly that." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Jennifer turned toward the judge, her face pale. "Your Honor, I must object to this highly irregular intervention." Nathaniel ignored her, his attention fixed on the prosecution table where Victoria Brennan had just stood up. "District Attorney Brennan," he said, his voice like ice, "I have some questions about the provenance of this evidence." Victoria's composure was perfect, but Alina saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Your Honor, if you have concerns about evidence, the appropriate time to address them would be during a formal hearing, not in the middle of witness testimony." "I am addressing them now," Nathaniel replied. He nodded toward the bailiff, who opened the chamber doors. Thomas Reed entered, carrying several boxes of documents. Behind him came two FBI agents that Alina did not recognize. Nathaniel addressed the courtroom with absolute authority. 3 weeks ago, I began to suspect that evidence in this case had been tampered with. I hired an independent investigator to examine the digital records. What he discovered was a systematic pattern of document fabrication, evidence manipulation, and witness intimidation, all traceable to the district attorney's office. The courtroom exploded in chaos. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. Lawyers were shouting objections and questions. Victoria Brennan stood frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking. Nathaniel raised his gavel and brought it down with a crack that silenced everyone. Furthermore, he continued, I have discovered that this entire investigation has been compromised from the beginning. The real corruption at Pinnacle Design Group is genuine. But several individuals, including Miss Winters, were deliberately framed as part of a larger scheme to manipulate judicial assignments and influence a federal judgeship nomination. He looked directly at Victoria. District Attorney Brennan, I am ordering an immediate investigation into your office's handling of this case. The FBI agents present will escort you and your team for questioning. This case is suspended pending a full review of all evidence. Victoria's face had gone white, then red with fury. You cannot do this, she said, her voice shaking. You are compromised in this case. Everyone knows you have a personal relationship with that witness. She pointed at Elena with an accusing finger. Nathaniel met her gaze without flinching. Yes, I do. Elena Winters and I began a relationship 4 months ago, long before any investigation began. She ended that relationship the moment she learned I would be presiding over this case, sacrificing her own happiness to protect judicial integrity. That is more honor than you have shown in your entire career, District Attorney. He stood, his presence commanding the entire room. I am recusing myself from this case effective immediately, but not before entering into the record that Miss Winters is an innocent woman who has been targeted by a corrupt official. The charges against her are dismissed with prejudice. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with